Welcome back to another deep dive with Colin. One of the most common questions we hear in our classes and from newer printers, even experienced printers to a smaller extent, regarding screens is what mesh tension is considered too low? At what point do I need to take a screen out of inventory and either throw it away or send it out to be restretched or just buy a new one? And it's a more complex answer than just saying, oh, when a screen hits 15 newtons on the tension meter, throw it away. Or, well, at 20, you want to be, there's a complex range of answers depending on what you're doing. All of that has an intrinsic tie-in with off contact and the level of detail you're doing and what your expectations are from a print. So I wanted to break it down just as a way to understand what happens with your screen when you are in the print process. What is tension? What happens when you pull a squeegee? Which is why I was talking about this ties in with functional off contact. If you want to know more about functional off contact and how I define it and how I describe it, we did a deep dive on that some weeks ago. You'll find a link either here or here at some point, I'm sure, or maybe there'll be a link below. We'll figure this out later. So to dive in talking about tension across screen sizes, I have 4 different types of frames here. I have your 20 by 24 manual screens, standard static aluminums. Then I have an eco frame at that same size. I have auto frames, 23 by 31s. And then I have a roller frame, which is something that a lot of us haven't seen in this industry for a while. But I want to pull that out as kind of the ultimate way to talk about tension. So let's pull out a 158 and let's check tension. Now my table is uneven, but for checking tension with what we're doing right now isn't that big a deal. So when I check this one, I have the meter facing towards me. I'm reading 30 newtons, just above 30 and just below 30, so 28. So if I point this towards the camera, that should read just above 30. And then this one is reading right about 28. Now this screen is about a year old and it's managed to hold really good tension. This is one of our standard 20 by 24s that you can get off of the shelf here at screenprinting.com. And when you are dealing with lower mesh counts on smaller frames, the ability for the mesh stretcher, the person making the screen, to get that mesh really nice and tight, their ability to keep that high tension is really good. It's very easy for them to do. But as that mesh goes up in mesh count, those threads get thinner and thinner. That becomes more troublesome even on a smaller frame. This small frame gives a really nice level of rigidity to the mesh itself, meaning that it will hold its tension. But if I pull out a 305 and check that tension, again, facing it towards me so I can read it, those are painful numbers to see. So that's 18, just under 18, and right about 18 as well. So this is a 305 that has gone through a couple of print cycles. By a couple meaning we've used it for a little bit and we've reclaimed it. Every time you reclaim it, you drop tension. Every time you pull a squeegee, you end up dropping tension. This is now low enough that it's good for nothing more than a single color print direct to fabric. And even then, if I'm doing something that's very high detail, I'm going to end up seeing a little bit of mesh shift. Now, what is mesh shift and why is mesh shift, that movement of the mesh, important? The lower the tension in your mesh, the more it wants to move as you take a squeegee and pull it across your image. As you push your squeegee down, you are grabbing a hold of that mesh, and then as you pull or push your squeegee, you are starting to distort that mesh. It's pulling along with that squeegee. So over a short distance, you don't really see any movement or potential where that mesh comes down, the dot prints, and then that mesh shifts just a little bit and causing a little bit of blurriness in your print. Over a longer distance, you're definitely going to see it. So to recap, the lower your mesh tension, the more likely it is to move with your squeegee when you are pulling or pushing a squeegee. As that image area comes down and the mesh is being pulled under tension from the squeegee, the low tension in the mesh is allowing it to shift a little bit, meaning that your dot, instead of being a nice, or your fine line being a nice clean deposit, is going to shift. And as a result, you're going to get a little bit of blur in that print. You will also see this on the back of your screen. You'll eventually get a little bit of ink buildup in those areas. That is the direct tie-in to at what point do you throw away your mesh and get it restretched or buy a new one. Under 20 newtons, when it comes to a 305, I would personally say anything under 20 newtons is when you want to look at getting new mesh, a new screen, remesh it, whatever it is that you're going to do with your static frames. Now, if I was to use this 305 mesh along with the 158, like you just saw that it was 30 newtons, made the white base out of my 158 mesh, and then printed the 305 mesh on top of it, I could get my color in my 305 mesh to line up on one end, but not the other. So I need to end up sliding that around back and forth because that mesh is going to move, and that color on that mesh is going to distort and elongate, which is why it's very important that you always use mesh counts that are closer together in tension so that you don't get that. But that is a direct understanding. At sub 20 newtons on a 305, definitely time to look at a new screen. Let's grab another 305. Again, I've had this one for 10 months now. We can see who manufactures it on the side. That is not an indicator of one company being better than another. This is simply a matter of use case over time and how good tension holds over time. So as I look at this one, that's 19. As I look at this one, that's 20. So as I hold this here, you can see the 19 on there. Now, if I'm running an auto size job, I can get a bigger size print. And specifically, I ran into an instance during our 20th anniversary in which I was slammed. I used every screen at my disposal in the darkroom, and I ended up mix and matching a few mesh counts and screen tensions. And this ended up on a job that was much more critical in terms of registration, and it didn't line up. It's at that point where I had said, I need to remove these from my inventory. I need to go and get these remeshed, which is very commonly done when you're running auto size static frames. Wait until you got a pallet, ship them back to be restretched, and then have those come in and go back into your cycle. That I can't use these anymore for any of my multicolor stuff. So let's take a look at the 158 on the auto size just to see what tension level that is. We're at 22 that way, 22. So on a 156 at 22 newtons, this is something that I can do for low color counts, looser registration, not a problem. But if I need to do, again, finesse work, this mesh tension is not quite what I want it to be. Again, totally doable, totally workable. This is something that you see in a lot of shops all over. Slightly lower tension. Everyone works with it by increasing their functional off contact. And talking about functional off contact, I want to show you guys what happens when you actually put a squeegee on a screen. So I have my squeegee here. This is a 14-inch squeegee. And I'm going to show you what happens to the mesh when you push a squeegee down. I'm going to lean in here just to look. Okay, cool. So when you apply pressure with the squeegee and you increase your off contact, because again, going back to that functional off contact video, you want your screen to lift off your print as fast as possible as you're pulling your squeegee. So when your squeegee goes down, you can see that your mesh tension goes up. Now this is a lot of off contact, definitely gets that point across of increasing your off contact increases your tension, which makes your functional off contact work better. If that off contact level is a little different, it still increases in tension, but not quite as much. So all of that goes back to what tension is too low. When do I throw that screen out? What's good for me? Functional off contact is definitely your friend when it comes to creating a better print, because that functional off contact increases your screen tension. If you need to increase your off contact to a more dramatic amount, then it's time to go get a new screen. I personally don't like printing with anything under 20 newtons. If I have my way, I'm going to have everything at 25 newtons or higher. But there's only a couple of ways to do that. Statics, the moment they're stretched, will never get any better. That mesh is always going to relax. There's two ways to work with that. One, eco frames or any other click frame variety. As your tension drops over time, and it's always going to drop, you can, once it gets too low, you can remove this mesh panel and put in another one. So this one is a 158 mesh. Okay. So we're currently sitting at 28 newtons widthwise and 30 newtons lengthwise, which is fantastic. This is a wonderful eco-frame stretch screen. When you first stretch any click frame, eco frames, Sherlock's, the others, you're always going to have a very high level of tension. And you go, oh my gosh, this is amazing, wow! Over the next 2 hours, you're gonna see that drop by about 4 to 6 newtons. Over the next 12 hours, you're gonna see that drop a little more. By the time you come in the next morning, I had an 8 newton drop. So when I first stretched the screen, it was 38 newtons lengthwise, and when I came in the next morning, it was 30. And it's pretty much stabilized from that point. Now, the very first time I take this in and I reclaim it, hitting it with a pressure washer, that pressure on the knuckles of the mesh is going to release some of that stored tension. The knuckles of the mesh release stored tension every time there is pressure applied to them. It's just like if you were to massage out a knot in one of your muscles. As you massage it, it loosens it up. Every time you pull a squeegee, every time you hit it with a pressure washer, you are allowing that stored tension in the knuckle of the mesh to relax and disperse, meaning that the tension level in your screen will drop. As you are stretching up the screen the first time, all that tension is like, oh my gosh! And it's like a mini earthquake across every knuckle. Over those first 12 hours, they're all, you got that first initial big earthquake and then the aftershocks. It's all evening out, it's all settling in. And then you go in and you give it that physical massage with the squeegee or the pressure washer, and you'll get out more and more tension. Over time, this is going to drop down to 25 newtons, down to the 22 newtons, down to 20 newtons. And somewhere in there, you're gonna make your choice of, I don't like its print performance compared to when I first stretched the screen and started to use it. I'm gonna pull that panel out, I'm gonna put a new panel in, and I'm gonna enjoy that increased performance out of the new panel. The roller. And this is the one that I like to geek out on. This is a roller frame. Specifically, it's the CFAR variant. And this allows you to retension your screen whenever you want. Give this a little bit more evenness. My tension levels right now, ooh, 37, 38, 37, a little over 36. That's pretty good tension. Anytime the tension in this frame drops past a point that I don't like, I just roll one of these bars to increase the tension level. With this, you can run crazy tensions. Now, for a 158, I'm not gonna see a whole lot of benefit past a 30 Newton tension level, but it's really nice to print when it's above 30 Newtons. When that screen gets tighter and tighter on that mesh, you can drop that off contact lower and lower, closer to your shirt. And when that squeegee touches down, you don't have to use nearly as much pressure to get it to clear the image area. Plus, you can actually pull your squeegee faster than you can with a lower tension screen. So that puts roller frames in that realm of a really nice sports car, maybe even a supercar. And the static frame, the standard, everyone uses a static frame. This is more like a family car, family sedan. Dependable, gets you from point A to point B, doesn't use a whole lot of gas. So, that was a lot of information, especially if you haven't really talked about screen tension before, if you don't have a tension meter. So to summarize and wrap this up for you, screen tension in your workshop only starts to become a pain point when your prints are not quite as good as you want them to be, when you have to increase your off contact in order to make your screen perform the way that you want it to, so that you can get the prints that you want. Now, of course, there are some other factors combined in that. Your EOM, check out our deep dive on EOM. Your squeegee selection, check out our deep dive on squeegee selections. And of course, that sharpness of your squeegee. And in that, we also want to, of course, be working with an ink that is well modulated and ready, warm enough, ready for production, so that you can get that really nice clean print. But if your screens are low enough tension and they're sticking to the print, or they're sticking to the shirt and to where your ink's laid down, none of that matters. The screen is the backbone of what we do in our industry. Increase that off contact. So if you need to take your screen to about 1/8 of an inch off contact or more, it's time to invest in a tension meter. It's time to figure out the tension level in the screens that you're using. We always want to work with the best quality tools we can. So for those of you who do not yet have a tension meter, what's another way to check tension other than, increasing your off contact? Sound check. The more it sounds like a bass drum, the lower that tension level is. The more it sounds like a snare drum, the higher that tension level is. Now that was the difference between 19 newtons and 30 newtons. Let's pull this one out and see if it sounds any higher. So it does sound a little bit higher. That's the difference between 7 newtons, between 30 and 37 newtons. At a certain point, you just want it to sound like a snare drum. Now, handling a snare drum in your average screen print environment is a little more challenging. And that does it for another deep dive with Colin. As always, leave a comment below if you have any questions. We'd love to hear from you. Like and subscribe. Always warms our heart when you do that. If you think this video is going to help someone, share it with them. Talk to you all later. See you in the next one.